Hi, I'm Celia Wexler, president of the DC chapter of the Society of Professional Journalists. It's my pleasure to welcome Miranda Spivack, the author of Backroom Deals in Our Backyards, How Government Secrecy Harms Our Communities, and the Local Heroes Fighting Back. The book tells the stories of accidental activists who face an information blockade when they discover serious problems in their communities. They are rebuffed by elected officials and regulators, despite the fact that these problems may be costing lives, impairing health and the environment, and despite laws on the books that are supposed to give citizens access to information. They succeeded, as Miranda states in her book, through persistence, finding support from their neighbors, experts on the internet, and sometimes resorting to lawsuits. Her book is based on her 2017 series, State Secrets for RevealNews.org. That series won SPJ's Sunshine Award. Previously, Miranda spent 20 years as a reporter and editor for The Washington Post, where she developed an ambitious plan for doing in-depth reporting about the DC region's underserved communities. You can find more about her impressive career at her website, Miranda Spivack, Spivack.com. Miranda, thanks so much for coming and taking the time to talk about the book. What drew you to these stories and even in the original series?
Yeah. So when I was at the Post, I was both an editor and a reporter in Prince George's County, Maryland. And this was around the time that the county executive was going to prison on corruption charges. So I wanted to sort of pick up the pieces from that because he'd actually pled guilty. And so there was not a huge court record to plumb. And, I wanted to sort of see what the outflow was from his corruption web. And that meant looking at outside contracts that the county had, trying to get information about out-of-court settlements where the county settled with, in one case, a hotel operator who had been shaken down by the county executive. And there were also issues about policing and other places where the county was engaging in payoffs, not necessarily illegal payoffs, but they were trying to repair the damage. And I was having a lot of trouble getting those documents. And I was like, this doesn't make sense. These are public documents. This is public money. I know what the Maryland Public Information Act says. They're denying this unfairly and illegally. And so we had a fight. And I also began to think if I was having this kind of problem as a journalist, and I know what the rules are, I know what I'm entitled to, then what about people who aren't journalists? They're not lawyers. What kind of experiences are they having with their local and state governments? And so I started to look around the country for different kinds of examples, and it was actually a little overwhelming. There's so many examples of places where, people find a problem in their community, whether it's poisoned drinking water or a dangerous road or failing sewer system, and they go to their government thinking naively, the government's here to help me, right? Not always. And they encounter these information blockades, and then they get angry and they learn how to unravel all these issues and, frankly, in most cases, make real change in their communities, although it's not easy.
What about the five that you profile in the book? How did you find them? And what made them so important to you to profile?
Yeah, the five issues in the book, a couple of them I've already mentioned: poisoned drinking water with forever chemicals, a failing sewer system in a community in Alabama, information about dangerous roads so that you could lobby successfully to get a turning light. And the state, in this case, that one was in Maryland, the state Department of Transportation just dodged and weaved at every turn. There was somebody who discovered or suspected there were toxins in firefighter protective gear, and that the gear that was supposed to be taking care of our first responders was actually potentially a source of poison. And then there was one other issue, which has to do with algorithms used in the criminal justice system and how that's all contracted out to private companies who develop the software for bail, for parole, whatever. And then when you go to try to either challenge the findings or in some other way try to find out about it, they claim that these are trade secrets, even though they're working on the public, with public funds. So I did a lot of whatever the internet equivalent is today of shoe leather reporting. And in one case, the dangerous roads happened to be one of the issues that I wrote about for the series in Reveal. So I was able to sort of update that one and amplify that. But the other ones were all new to me. And some of this was happening right around the time of the pandemic, actually. So people were home. They actually did want to talk to people. And then, it was this kind of conversation where I would say, well, I'm writing a book. I don't have a contract yet, but I'm writing a book. And these people really wanted to talk about their problems. And I think they may have also thought maybe I had some ideas about how they might resolve their problems. I certainly wasn't giving advice, but these became long relationships and, people had to trust me and they didn't know me, but I guess I sounded like a good bet.
So it would be like a small, just information factoid that got you. You got enough information, maybe from the internet, just to be able to get a name, and then you kind of went from there. Um, you know, a lot of times when you contact somebody who's in the middle of a big struggle about something really important to them, like cancer that their husband developed from the faulty equipment, what they wear in this case. When you get to them as a reporter, they're kind of all over the place. They're very emotionally involved. They don't necessarily tell their stories in little chronological sound bites.
Right.
So, how do you school? What if you were telling a class of journalists how you kind of how do you get through that to get to the story, and then how do you fact check it and sort of establish the chronology and and get the emotion out for a while, just until the story
Yeah,
is
I mean, that's
clear.
a very good assessment of what it's like to do these kinds of stories. You're absolutely right. People do not speak in paragraphs. They don't speak in linear kind of, here's the beginning, the middle, and the end. You need to be very patient. You need to be a very good listener, and you need to sit through some very long conversations and take copious notes. And sometimes something will leap out at you. This is more like magazine journalism, I guess.
Yeah.
I mean, I was obviously a daily journalist for decades. And, you might be doing an interview at 2 o'clock and filing a story at 5 o'clock. And you're sort of listening, where's the quote, where's the soundbite, whatever. And then the other stuff, maybe you're just dismissing. But in this kind of reporting, you really have to listen to the whole thing. And you do have to synthesize it, and it takes time. I mean, these people, I talked to most of these people for 3 or 4 years.
Yeah.
And I did finally get a contract, but that was in 2023. And I started my reporting really at the end of 2019. So, there was a long period where they just were telling me everything, and I was trying to figure out where this was all going to go. And, it's just a different time frame from daily or even weekly journalism.
Yeah, it is. And you must have thought a lot even before, as you said, you understand about what obstacles reporters face just from your own time as reporters. And I just thought, when you think about the legal obstacles these citizens and reporters face, what are the biggest ones at the local and state level? Because then again, we always think of the federal government right now, especially, taking down websites and doing horrible stuff. But there's a lot that goes on at the state and local level that gets sometimes ignored, even by reporters. So,
Well,
what do
I
you?
think, yeah, I think actually most people, if they're going to have an encounter with government, it is going to be at the state or local level, whether it's the school board, the city council, um, the local economic development office, the planning agency. Those are probably the big ones where people will want to interact. They have a reason to interact with their local government. Frankly, most people don't interact with the federal government. They may now over Social Security or something like that, but even now with all this stuff going on, I don't see people rising up and, going to the CDC and saying, put those people back on the vaccine panel. No, they're going to try to find out what is my school system now going to require for
Yeah.
vaccines? What can I do to make sure that my kid is safe and riding a school bus with a school bus driver who's had a background check? So, I think that there is a lot of obstruction at the state and local level. Some of it is not intentional. They are underfunded generally. Being the public records officer in a small agency is not exactly a career builder. You have to go around and bug your colleagues for information that, they're busy, they don't want to give out. In fact, I had a book reading in New England the other day, and some guy came up to me afterwards and he said, I used to work for the Massachusetts Fisheries Department or something like that. And he said it was a major pain in the neck when there were public records requests because I had to drop everything and give this a person, my documents. So, there are a lot of reasons why there's obstruction. Of course, in my book, some of it is nefarious. And there are these kind of backroom deals, often with developers or somebody who wants to put a factory that might be a polluter in town or somebody who is polluting in town. Um, but it's, I think it is where most people will intersect with government.
And what kind of obstacles in your book? You're very detailed. You give detailed explanations about what gets in the way, like maybe a provision in a law. Um, tell let's Can you
Well, One of
explain
the
some of
one of
that?
the big yeah, one of the big obstacles that people will encounter is the trade secrets
Yeah.
exemption. And this is in every state public records law. So I mentioned that in the context of criminal justice, but it's also very widespread. For example, was a situation in Los Angeles where the public transit agency, the Metro, I think it's called, um, bought these buses from a company that was going to build these big, energy saving, environmentally sound buses. And the company, in order to get the contract, made all kinds of offers to the city agency about paying, a livable wage, having certain benefits for employees, doing a whole bunch of things. And then an outside group wanted to know if, in fact, they were complying with the terms of this agreement a few years after it had been signed. And the metro agency, the transit agency, was ready to give the information out. And the private company came back in and said, no, 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 you can't give that information out. These are trade secrets. It's going to harm us in the marketplace. It's going to tip off our competitors. Never mind that they'd already signed a contract and people knew what the terms are. The question was whether they were complying. And so instead of defending the people, as I think the Metro agency should have done, they capitulated and they let the contractor make the decisions about what could be public and what might not be public, even though again public funds are being expended, and that's the key. When tax money, tax breaks, whatever are being implicated in some way, right away you should say that those are public documents and we should get those details. But that's the kind of thing where public agencies will often defer to their outside contractors, and there are many, many outside contractors. I mean, in some communities, trash pickup is an outside contractor. The school bus drivers are outside contractors. There's lots of places where outside contractors are involved in government, and then they will try to block the information because they'll claim it's going to hurt them in the marketplace. One example I gave in the book was in a West Virginia case where there was a private water company supplying the
Yeah.
public water supply. And there was a community group that wanted some information because there'd been a big pollution failure, et cetera. And so the company fought it for a long time. And then when they did finally give up some of the documents, they blacked out or redacted the 800 number of the West
Yes.
Virginia Public Utilities Commission. I'm like, that is not a trade secret. But, it's that kind of use and abuse that goes on. And trade secrets is a huge problem. And the Supreme Court in the last couple of years ruled in a way that makes it even harder for governments and the public to get this information.
What do you think, as you think about the people profiled in your book? I, I guess it's unfair to ask if you have a favorite, but
Yeah.
what's one example that you think sort of best illustrates, one lone citizen and how that citizen figured out. I mean, my own favorite, I think, is the wife of the firefighter, but
Yeah.
I don't know what your favorite
Yeah,
is.
I don't know that I have a favorite, but I think that all these people are very tenacious. And the one that is still really in play right now is in Alabama, and this is the
Yeah,
failing sewer system, in which the state and mostly the federal government has spent about $30 million to fix the sewer system for a community of about 2,000 people. The money's gone, the system's not fixed. The community has wanted to know for several years, how is the money being spent? Are the right decisions being made? And both the local water board, which is made up of local residents, all the way up to the state environment regulator in Alabama, all the way to the U.S. Department of Agriculture, which is the source of most of the funds, have been very, very obstructionist in giving out any kind of information to the community. And they did actually have to they got a law clinic at Vermont Law School to help them out. And those are options that people really should look at because in a lot of states, as we know, if you get turned down for public records, often your only option is actually to go to court and sue. So, of course, that ends it for most people.
yeah, yeah. I think one of the things you mention a little bit in the book is the decline of local journalism. That there used to be many more small town newspapers covering some of this, at least going to city council meetings. We don't have that.
Right, right.
What do you think is going to help fill that gap? Do you think I mean, I just read this today. I think there was a survey that showed social media, more people get their news from social media, God help us, than
Yeah,
any place.
yeah.
But do you think it will be podcasts? Do you think, how else do you think uh, the the importance of this kind of information will get out to the public?
Well, you're right. The decline of local news does contribute a lot to what I'm writing about in the book, and that it falls to local residents who have absolutely no training at all, and they do become self-taught investigators. But that has really definitely contributed to the idea that these governments can operate secretly and with impunity. And no, there's no reporter at the city council meeting at midnight anymore, and that's of course when the deals all go down. So, there are a lot of possibilities. There are a lot of small nonprofits growing up around the country. Whether they can sustain themselves or not is an open question. People have to be willing to pay for this, and
Yeah.
now if you go to Starbucks or whatever, at least in the big cities, it's $5 for a cup of coffee now. Can't we cough up $30 a month for a small local news operation as a subscriber? It's like also giving to NPR and other operations like that. And public radio is actually a big deal in some of these underpopulated communities because there really is no other source of information. The other thing is that people do community listservs are useful. The tricky part is people exaggerate or they don't do fact checking or there's some other misinformation being circulated. There is something going on in Chicago that I find very interesting. I don't know how successful it's going to be, but documenters, I don't know if you're familiar with that. So they are training residents to go to public meetings, to take notes. They've explained about conflict of interest. You can't cover a dispute that you're involved with, that kind of stuff. We'll see if that works, but I think somehow it's going to be a combination of philanthropy helping small local startups. People have got to be willing to pay for this, even if you are in, a lower income area. There's got to be some way to sustain this. And then we've got to train as many people, preferably journalists, but I'm willing to look at this citizen journalism model because I think if we don't have something, we're going to have nothing.
And in those places where many of our members are still reporters and still at local outlets, they might be short staffed, but they're there. How do reporters convince their editors that these kinds of stories are worth doing?
A great
You're
question.
smiling at me.
Well, I think reporters and young reporters in particular, you got to be willing to do a bunch of things at once. And
Yeah.
so you've got to have the longer story going on that you're working on the side, in addition to whatever your daily obligations are. And I know that there are a lot, but and you've got to you should go to public meetings. I mean, I got some of the best stories I ever got at the Washington Post. One of them was about Mitch Rales and his secret art gallery in Montgomery County, where but he came to, or somebody else on his behalf came to a planning board meeting, and they started talking about this museum that I'd never heard of, even though I've lived here for, at that point, 25 years. And he wanted a sewer. It was very mundane, but it was very important. And it just set off a whole bunch of stories about privilege for the elites, getting something that other people weren't getting, and this great art collection that he had, and just a lot of different things. So, reporters do need to show up. They need to be in the community, and they have to juggle multiple things. And there's a good payoff for that. I mean, you'll get some great stories out of that just by realizing that there are little bits that you can keep collecting string, we used to call it. And you got to be able to do that.
And I think too, as much as I appreciate what we're able to do today on Zoom, and I appreciate the webinars that are available, there is something to be said about being in the room where the decisions are being discussed, because you will see how council member X really doesn't like council member Z or whatever. You catch those things that you don't necessarily get.
Right.
You
Right.
get the underlying. And I think that maybe that's something for new reporters, or anyway, all career, any mid or even senior career reporters, to remember that being in the room can be really important too. I think the problem is as you mentioned, it's sort of the ability to cultivate the ability to do many things at the same time, not one thing, to fulfill what you have to do that day, but to collect that string. And sometimes I don't want to put you on the spot, Miranda, but I am. Sometimes it
Oh,
means
go ahead.
that you have an assignment and you do it, but then you spend more time doing something else that you don't necessarily tell the desk about until it's ready to be baked.
Yeah, no, I think
And
that's okay. I think you just never know what's out there. And so if you are only focused on what's right in front of you, that's a mistake. Um, I think I think that there are plenty of really interesting stories out there. Going in person is huge. When I was teaching a few years ago at DePauw University, and having my students write stories, and they would come back and say, well, I sent a text message to so and so, or I sent an email and I didn't hear back. And I'm like, that guy's office is 3 blocks from here. Why don't you just show up? And the
yeah,
whole notion of showing up I mean, this is somewhat generational, I think. People are much more reticent to pick up the phone, to show up in person, whatever. But I think we really need to cultivate those skills big time, because the person who does show up is more likely to get the story.
I also want to remind people, both reporters who are tuning in and non-reporters, that your book includes a very significant section of resources. So places where people can go. If I'm a reporter and I don't understand something, there are organizations that you can online, you can find a lot of information about how to find information online. Are there a couple you want to recommend now?
Well, I think for journalists, obviously, the Reporters Committee for Freedom of the Press, which has a state by state guide on open government laws in each state. So you can consult that. Those are all written by lawyers in each state. So if you are looking around for a First Amendment lawyer, you might try that person too. In fact, I did in Alabama, where I was having trouble because Alabama is one of many states who say it's okay not to give out documents if you're not a state citizen, never mind
Yes.
resident. So, and I was having trouble with that, and ultimately had to get somebody to file for me who lived in the state. But um, I think the reporters committee is super helpful. I also think if you are somebody interested in community work or community organizing, I was fascinated to learn that University of Kansas, KU, has a whole guide, thousands of pages of guidance on community building and community organizing, and that's listed in the this last chapter, which is the how-to chapter of the book. The book itself, each experience of these accidental activists, what they do is also very, very instructive. But I did sort of summarize it all in this last chapter too, and I think those things are very useful. How to get free legal help, which you may need either as a journalist or as a member of the public. There are, especially for environmental issues, there are a lot of environmental groups that will go to bat for you.
Yeah, and I just wanted to get a sense. I know you've been doing lots of public appearances with the book. You were on 1A, NPR's 1A. And what is the reaction of readers to this? And what kinds of questions are you hearing from readers?
It's also a very good question. The reaction of readers is a lot of people read the book and they're like, "Oh my God, really this is horrible and
Yeah,
these experiences are terrible and I had no idea and blah blah blah." And that's partly because a lot of people don't have these problems until they have these problems.
yeah.
So that's been interesting to me. I mean, some of the response has been way more passionate than I think I even expected, and that's great. I think that a lot of people right now, especially because of the way things are going down in Washington, a lot of people are coming to me and saying, "Wow, you showed me I could make a difference. I may not be able to touch the DC agencies, but I can put pressure closer to home. Some of that can ripple nationally. For example, the firefighter protective gear issue that woman, a high school graduate with no experience investigating anything, has sparked a national effort to make firefighter protective gear way safer and have fewer chemicals in it. So I think, there are people right now really looking around for what can I do? How can I make a difference? And, that's just fortuitous timing for the book. Obviously, it's very sad for the country, but that's a lot of what I'm getting is like, oh, wow, I can do something.
Yeah, because that was sort of the question I had in mind. Given what's going on at the federal level, people I think are really more sensitive to state and local and what
Right.
can be done and what can be saved
Right.
to a certain extent in terms of democracy. Miranda, is there anything else that I haven't asked you that you would like to say? I always do this in any interview I've ever done.
Sure. No, I mean, I would encourage people, if you possibly can, buy the book and to do it on bookshop.org, which supports independent bookstores around the country, or go to your local independent bookstore. That I think is great if we can support those people because they're supporting us in many communities. And I'm also open. I'm easy to find. If people have questions or have advice or suggestions or want me to look at their own issues with them, I'm trying to do that. I am actually getting a lot of those requests right now, but I'm very open to trying to spread the word that open government is a good idea.
Well, I think that's a good way to end this conversation. Thank you so much, Miranda, for taking the time to talk about your book. And again, the name of the book is Backroom Deals in Our Backyards: How Government Secrecy Harms Our Communities and the Local Heroes Fighting Back. Fighting Back.
Yeah,
And
thanks.
yeah, and then bookshop.com,
Org. Org.
org,
Yeah.
bookshop.org. Get the book there.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks.
Thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you.